We're live.
We never acknowledge it.
It says live for 13 seconds. We've been live for longer than.
Wait, no, it
I
says
thought we've been
mine
alive?
says live for 9 minutes and 30. It says 9:39.
What? Has the last 9 minutes of our conversation been unknowingly uploaded to YouTube? Because that would be awkward.
No, I have 28 seconds.
That is so weird.
Yeah, why is ours different?
I have 41 seconds now.
Mine says 10 minutes.
Okay.
So you're gonna have to figure that out.
Hey, Jessica, do you want to intro Zola, or do you want me to?
You could do it. That sounds good. I don't know how do you say the director's name?
Janixa Bravo.
Janixa, okay.
Janixa.
Well, there you go. No, because when I introduce movies, I just read the description.
Yeah, I love it. It cracks me up. It's just like, in a small town, a girl found...
I just read the description because I get nervous, and I'm like, I'm going to forget how to talk about, like, how to describe what is going on in the movie. So
it makes you feel better. Nadine forgets to describe the movie at all. She just, like, goes in on everything else.
And
it's like, so what was that movie about again?
Stream, but, like, she has to, like, exhaust all of the context knowledge that she has about the movie, which can sometimes take 15 minutes before we get to the movie.
It's like you can find it on HBO Max. Also, it's about a young girl in a town. And you're just like, oh, now I know what it's about. I learned all about like how it pertains to wrestling mythology, but I didn't know what it was about.
We love you, Nadine.
Yeah, this is more just it cracks
me
up.
Out of love.
It entertains
Everybody's got
me.
Their quirks.
And I'm just like, where did you like? Were you ever going to learn what this movie's about? Nah, it's all about whatever else. It's all good. All right, here we go. We'll go Andrew and then Jessica for the order.
Okie doke.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. And welcome to episode 359 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford.
And Jessica Carr.
And in today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we'll be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1929's Diary of a Lost Girl. And we're going to be, I'm going to kick these two out, and it's just going to be me. I'm going to do a nice little one-on-one interview with the founder of the Louise Brooks Society, Thomas Wadish. So it's a good chat. If you're into some nice silent movie history, we go deep on that, talk a little bit about why she went from America to Germany, which seemed like an odd move. And all
Didn't we also talk to the head of the Buster Keaton Society a couple years ago?
We did.
Or was that something else? That's cool.
He kind of has a cool history. We get into it in the second part, but like that he like started this as like a blog, and then it just kind of like snowballed, and he's been like on documentaries and other stuff. But he's really peaked because he's on the Cinematary podcast now. So
that's right. It's all downhill from here, buddy.
Yeah, after that, it's just like. But that's coming up in part 2. Let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week in part 1. I'm going to start it off with a new release that you guys saw.
Oh, yeah. Zola is the first movie that we're going to talk about. Jessica and I saw this together. This movie is by Janixa Bravo. She is a relatively new filmmaker. She also made a feature called Lemon a couple years ago. And a TV miniseries called Mrs. America. Both of those things I have not seen, so I can't speak to them or like her authorial. That's the word. Authorial stamp. But I did see Zola, and I did really like it. So the basic premise of Zola. There's a bit of context about the movie, which is that it is, I think, the first movie ever to be adapted from a tweet thread. Mm-hmm. And it is specifically a tweet thread that was tweeted by a stripper who tweeted this very long story on Twitter of her kind of going on a road trip under false pretenses with another stripper and kind of having her life put in danger in many different occasions. And so that tweet thread kind of blew up. It went viral. She deleted it at one point, but the screenshots were saved by some random white boy on Reddit, and he archived them on Imager.com, and it has kind of lived on there. One fun fact that I recently learned is that guy has a Letterboxd account, and he wrote a review of Zola in which he linked people to a video of him at the premiere meeting the titular Zola for the first time. Zola is the name of the stripper who wrote the tweet thread. And like, she deleted that tweet thread because she didn't want it to be out there. But this guy like has held on to it and kind of made her the subject of a lot of like fascination and mockery for many years. And I'm sure she's somewhat resentful of that. But she invited him to the premiere, and there's this video of them meeting that is extremely awkward. Extremely awkward video. Go find it. I'm sure it's not that hard to find. I don't know what the name of the guy or anything like that, but you can do some Googling, I'm sure. Anyways, that's the context. Like I said, it's about this black stripper named Zola who meets this white stripper played by Riley Keough. Zola is played by, let me pull her name up, Taylor Page, who I don't think I've seen in anything before, but she's really, really good here. She does a lot of good like facial acting, a lot of really intense side eye. And she also provides the narration for the movie, which is often very terse. And like when narration comes in a movie, you usually expect a couple of sentences or a paragraph. And sometimes her narration will just be like comically short, like a couple of words. Like one thing that she says twice is, "They had sex. It was weird." Like that's just a funny interjection for an omniscient narrator to jump in with. But she meets Riley Keough's character. They go on this road trip. The idea is they're going to go to Florida and make a bunch of money stripping. But then it turns out Riley Keough is actually going on a trip with her pimp, and the pimp is trying to get Zola involved in some like essentially sex trafficking. It's not, I wouldn't call it sex work. I would call it sex trafficking because they're kind of being forced to do it at gunpoint. And that might be a minor spoiler, but the movie gets really crazy. Like I had a friend at work who read the tweet thread, and he was like, you know, if they put half the stuff in this tweet thread in this movie, it's going to be a crazy freaking movie. And my main takeaway from it after watching the movie and reading the tweet thread is, because I waited until after to read it, is that it seems like the primary goal here was just to represent the events of the tweet thread as accurately as possible. There are a couple of small changes, but for the most part, it's just beat for beat, every single thing that happens in the tweet thread, down to like the wording a lot of times. And so I have lots of thoughts about it. I like I said, I enjoyed it. I think it's really fun. It's really funny. It's really entertaining. But I have been talking for a long time. So Jessica, I'm going to kick it to you. What did you think of Zola?
I liked it a lot. I didn't read the tweet thread like before or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And I had just been watching like the trailer like over and over again, and also like all the press stuff that they were doing. I really liked like how stylized the movie was. Like there are very interesting choices in there of like, I want to say sort of like dream sequency type of things that are happening with like mirrors and lights, and all of that stuff was amazing. Like I loved like how the movie looked visually, and like how the women were like so comfortable in their skin, and like whenever they were dancing at the clubs, and like none of the men were really involved in the story yet. They were like so empowered, and the way that the camera like follows their bodies is like, doesn't make you cringe. It doesn't make you think like, ew, this is nasty. And like,
it's really impressive.
Yeah, it's like you're kind of like taking it in, and like how beautiful they are and how empowered they are, and like how strong they are, because they're like lifting their bodies up on this pole and like swinging around with like giant heels, and like there's even a part where her ass like claps on the pole, and you're like, this is great. Like this looks so cool. I'm like, I wish I could do that. That's awesome. And it's like a crazy like transition between that, and then once the men get involved, it's like full of fear, and like the women are kind of like covering themselves up, and like the outfits kind of change. And it's just like, it's such an interesting like juxtaposition between like the beginning of the movie and then when the men get involved, and then the sequences that are like shot like with all of the men, who are very disgusting, by the way. Like every single dude in that film is like very, very nasty, and it's just like crazy that they were able to do that just through camera work alone. Like you can get that sort of undertone in the film just through that, which is like it's very impressive to me. But I like the film a lot. My one thing that I don't really like the ending. Yeah, I don't think that they express the story very well. Like they don't give it lots of closure, which could be for a reason, because it's like, oh, well, there really isn't any closure. But it kind of made me, it made it feel incomplete to me. And I ended up actually like reading a Rolling Stone article after the movie was over to get the deets on what was to follow and everything that happened afterward, and even some stuff before. Like I was very invested in the story just from the movie, and so I would have liked the movie to give us a more complete picture, so that I didn't feel like I had to spend like 30 minutes afterwards reading an article to try to figure out like what happened with the story.
I strongly agree. The weakest thing about the movie is the ending for me, and it's funny you say that we're kind of left with this lack of closure, because I mentioned that, you know, the most of the movie is just kind of representing the events of the tweet thread as accurately as possible. But there is an ending to the tweet thread that's not in the movie. And I think that the ending of the tweet thread is a much more satisfying ending than the one we ended up getting, which is like a non-ending. It's one of those things where the movie just ends, right? And it doesn't end on a particularly like interesting or impactful image. It doesn't end after we've achieved any sort of narrative closure. It's just like the characters are driving and credits roll, right? And you're like expecting a scene after. Like there are several things you're like, well, I wonder what's going to happen with this, and you just never get it. So and that's just such a weird choice. Maybe they've talked about an interview somewhere, like why they made that choice, but it didn't feel like it paid off for me anyway. I would say, on a positive note, though, the most impressive thing of the movie for me, other than the acting, was the music. And the music is so good and so interesting and so weird. And then the credits rolled and it said music by Mika Levy. And I was like, of course the music is by Mika Levy, composer of Under the Skin, for people who do not know. The thing that Mika Levy does here is they are working with a lot of samples, as they tend to do in their work. And the primary sample they're using in like the main theme of the movie is like this built-in like iPhone text message notification sound. And they take the chord of this text message notification sound and they kind of interpolate it and they transpose it and they make these chord progressions out of it, and they add all this other instrumentation around it. And it's really beautiful and really interesting and like really kind of thematically related to, you know, the context of this movie coming out on or like originally being told on Twitter, and also like the many ways in which communication is happening through cell phones in this movie. You also get like little timestamps that look like the timestamp on the top of an iPhone lock screen. And there's also like montage sequences that are built around these loops, like these really, really simple rudimentary loops that at first glance or at first hearing, they kind of sound like really upbeat, like dancey, like trap music or something. But because the loops are so simple, as they go on, you kind of like recognize how artificial they are. Like you start to hear like the seams in between each one of the loops. And that kind of goes along with the sort of artificial, affection or artificial ways in which these characters are interacting with each other so often in this movie. I mean, I just thought the score was so brilliant. So yeah, I think that in general, this is a big positive for me. I wish it had a better ending. I also wish it felt like it had a little bit more to say about some of the things it was about. Whether that be like sex work or race or social media or cell phones or whatever. I feel like those things are just sort of like facts of life in the story and not necessarily things the story goes out of its way to comment upon, which could be a positive or negative thing depending on your perspective, I guess. But super entertaining, super like energetic movie. People should go watch it.
I think it's cool that
Yes.
Janicza Bravo is like getting to make like it's not like a giant movie, but it's like a movie that plays like in movie theaters, and a lot of her stuff has been very like she's done a lot of short films, a lot of TV episodes, and she's had a couple features, but they've been very small indie things that don't really appear in like a multiplex. And so it was kind of cool that like at the local AMC that Zola's playing, like she's a cool, interesting voice that's done. She's done some good stuff on TV, so I'm glad to see her like getting a shot.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, I guess Zola, you can find it at your local movie theater. If you were so inclined. I'm going to go the opposite direction. You cannot find this at your local movie theater, but it is a new movie. And that is No Sudden Move, which is the latest Steven Soderbergh movie. It is available on HBO Max because I think he's got a deal with them. He's been doing stuff for them lately. But this one got a pretty big cast on this one. It's about this. So you have this trio of hitmen who are played by Don Cheadle, Benicio del Toro, and Kieran Culkin, who are hired by I guess we haven't seen Brendan Fraser in a while, but he looked different. But Brendan Fraser kind of plays like this man who hires these three hitmen to go and make sure that this job goes off without any hitches. And the job is they're going to go to David Harbour's house, who is the dude, the police guy from Stranger Things. And they're going to go to his house and force him and his family at gunpoint. They're going to force him to go to his office. He works at General Motors. It's Detroit in the 1950s. And go get some document that has, some sort of trade information. And he's going to bring it back and they're going to leave. Naturally, that doesn't go the way that they kind of expect it to. And so things go a little awry. And so then it's them trying to figure out who set them up for this job. Was it Brendan Fraser? Was it this one mobster who's played by Ray Liotta, mobster who's played by Bill Duke? You also have this I don't think he's a federal agent. He's just like a government. It's John Hamm. They put a suit and tie on him, and he's a government agent. And he's a dick, and so he's good in that role. But yeah, I think it's a little bit more. It's way more structured than a lot of like Soderbergh's recent stuff has been, which I've been a giant fan of recent Soderbergh stuff because he's constantly, and it's very apparent in this also, he's constantly just like kind of trying stuff, and he's constantly taking. And he talked about this on Mark Maron's podcast, but he's, obsessed with like getting, with like taking familiar genres of movies, familiar kind of movie tropes, but like also infusing them with like not only new technologies, but like just new ways of thinking. And so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like his last one. Which I think it's
High Flying Bird. Oh no! It was the one with Meryl Streep.
Yeah, I'm just gonna be like, the Meryl Streep one. Let Them All Talk. Let Them All Talk is pretty like it's been like all over the place because you have like High Flying Bird and Unsane, which are entirely shot on iPhones, and like he's talking about that, and Mark Maron's like, are you like, is it a gimmick? Like, are you trying to do this like just to see if it works? So he's like, no, I just kind of. It just felt right for like this, like he was like, this story felt like it needed to be like kind of claustrophobic and like this seemed like the perfect device for that. Like there wasn't any like, he's like, I'm not like trying to like galaxy brain it. I'm just thinking of what works best for the story. And then you have like the Meryl Streep movie, which is just like, everybody's on a cruise ship. And so it's very contained and it's kind of claustrophobic in that way. And so it's going to be kind of intimate. And it's super stripped down. It's almost like it's literally like Steven Soderbergh kind of made a Hong Sang-soo movie. It's kind of cool in that realm, just because it's like there's not much happening. There's just kind of these muddling characters who all have their different prerogatives, and they're all just kind of mashed together on a cruise ship. And this one is a little bit more, like I said, this one's much more structured. Like it feels much more traditional. I saw a lot of people kind of harkening back to like his Ocean's movies and Logan Lucky and things like that. It's definitely like engaged with like being like a film noir. Like it kind of takes a lot of different noir-ish tropes and kind of tosses them together. But I mean, I think the majority of like the entertainment value, at least for me, is one, I think Soderbergh's such a smart director. He sets up everything in such a interesting and like fascinating way. He's using this lens in this movie that's kind of like a fisheye lens, that like distorts, like, so like if like this is the lens, it's like distorting the image here, so like you'll see the image, you'll see like Benicio del Toro straight ahead, but then you'll kind of have like that fisheye effect on the side, so you can't really see what's going on around you. And it's a little disorienting at first, but then you kind of get used to it, because it also kind of creates this effect where you're focusing in on the action in front of you, and you become like everything around you kind of becomes diluted, because that's kind of what these characters are dealing with, where they're focused on the one thing of like, this money is here and I need to have this money and not die, but there's all this dilution around it. And he's able to kind of work with that and work in this what I found to be kind of a clever sociopolitical kind of comment into it that doesn't feel like too ham-fisted, that I thought was really interesting. I think it's a nice little smart movie. I think it's one of those movies that unfortunately people put a lot of like they put a lot on, because they get angry that, oh well, he's just copying, like he's copying these noir tropes, he's copying this, he's like just kind of like I think people have issue. There's people who have like issues with directors playing in genre, and it's like, yes, he's not trying to reinvent the genre. He's like, I like this, I'm gonna make a story in it, and I'm just gonna kind of. You have like Don Cheadle, who's like finally gets to act. He's been stuck in fucking Avengers movies for like a decade now. Like he gets to act, and he's great. You got Benicio del Toro, who's been like kind of popping up in like some bigger movies, and he gets to act. You get David Harbour actually gets to like kind of have some fun and not be stuck in the Stranger Things universe. You get to see Brendan Fraser. Where's Brendan Fraser been? It's that's kind of great. Bill Duke wears a pimp jacket the entire time and has these giant sunglasses. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's really fun. Like, all of that stuff is just kind of really fun. And I think that he's such a skilled director that it makes it worthwhile. And so if you have HBO Max, I recommend checking it out. I think it's a good one. And I'm like on like the front car of the late period Soderbergh train. I really like all the stuff he's doing.
You're the biggest late period Soderbergh fan I know. I don't know if this is like a big thing.
No, we need to talk about late period Soderbergh with Astor. I think it was off mic, off camera, talking about Unsane and how much we like Unsane. So like, we need to just have like a late period Soderbergh geek out for one episode.
Do it. Yeah.
So, all right, I'm gonna toss it over to you, Andrew. You have another streaming person.
Yeah. Speaking of filmmakers playing with genre, here's a good example of a movie that's playing with genre, like emphasis on playing. That movie is Fear Street Part 1, colon 1994. And as the title suggests, this is one part of a larger film series. There are actually going to be 3 Fear Street movies that were all shot concurrently, and they're all being dropped one after another on Netflix over the next couple of weekends. So part 1 is on Netflix now. Part 2 will be on Netflix probably by the time you hear this episode. And then part 2 is going to be on Netflix the week after that. So it's one kind of like large scope story presented in 3 feature films, which is kind of interesting. I was interested in this partially because of the premise, but partially because I was really impressed by the director's first feature. This is only her second released feature. The director, I'm really sorry, I'm definitely going to say her name wrong, but it's Lee Janiak, maybe. But her debut is called Honeymoon, which I also saw on Netflix several years ago. And I talked about it on the podcast, actually, so people can go back and re-listen to that if they want to. I really liked Honeymoon. I thought it was a horror movie. It's like a cabin in the woods horror movie, but it's not like most cabin in the woods horror movies. It's very tight, very mysterious, very smart. And so when I heard about this, I was really excited. So the basic idea here is that the Fear Street movies are all slashers, but they're all set in different historical time periods. So the first one is set in 1994. The second one is set in the 70s, and the third one is set in the 1600s. So you're experiencing this like recurring slasher as we often do in slasher franchises, which can go on for like 5, 6, 7 iterations. But now we're doing them backwards. We're going back in time and talking about how this slasher has kind of existed for, decades, centuries, who knows how long, right? And I don't know where this is going to end up going. I can only talk about the first part of it, but I thought that was a really interesting premise. It is also a dead teenager movie, which, I've been wanting to see more dead teenager movies. I talk about it in my video essay on guns and horror. There's actually like a really funny moment in this movie where there's a slasher sequence set in a school with this like really conspicuously placed gun-free school zone sign that I thought was really funny. But yeah, I like slashers. I think they're interesting on kind of a theoretical level, even if they're not particularly good. And this also kind of has the added like pedigree of being an adaptation of an R.L. Stine series. There's R.L. Stine did the Goosebumps books, but he also did a really long series called Fear Street, which is like 50 plus books. And I don't think this movie is an adaptation of any individual book. I think it's just kind of like working in the world that R.L. Stine, created. But it's not a kids movie. It's rated R. It has a lot of blood and violence and profanity and sex. And there's like a lesbian romance at the center of the movie, which is like just really interesting to kind of like breathe a certain amount of like fresh and adult life into, this beloved children's franchise. So very cool concept. There are unfortunately a lot of drawbacks to the movie, at least, just basing my assessment on the first installment of it. One is needle drops. There are a lot of needle drops in this movie, and it seems like that's the primary way they want to convey what time period we're in to the viewers. But there comes a point where there are too many needle drops. And when I say too many, I mean you get 10 seconds of one 90s song and then immediately 10 seconds of another 90s song. And in some cases, then immediately 10 seconds of a third 90s song. And it's just like, it's totally tonally inconsistent. It's distracting because like, I would love to watch a whole montage set to Radiohead's Creep, but you gave me the first 5 seconds of Radiohead's Creep just to be like, hey, remember the 90s? Remember this song? It's really distracting. And it does kind of taper off after a certain point once we kind of get into like the meat of the story. But the first like 30, 45 minutes is just like, Nine Inch Nails, Portishead, Insane in the Membrane, like again and again and again, like constant needle dropping. Another thing about it is that I don't even know if this is a positive thing or a negative thing, but the climax of this movie is like genuinely upsetting in a way that I'm not used to feeling in a slasher. And maybe that's the point. Maybe like this is supposed to like be a very emotional reimagining of what a slasher could be. Because most of the time in slasher movies, the characters are just kind of like meat puppets who are there to get, cut up. But I like really cared about these kids by the end. And I didn't at the beginning. I thought they were obnoxious at the beginning, but I really cared about them by the end. And there's like, I don't want to spoil it. So I won't, but I will say that there's a character who's like doomed to die after a certain point. Like everybody knows this character's going to die, and they might have to like make it happen themselves. Like they might have to kill their friend who they love, right? And like the weight of death kind of like hangs over this movie in like a really intense way. Like the sense of the finality of somebody's life, especially somebody so young, kind of hangs over this movie in a way that is, again, like really uncharacteristic of this genre. And I also, so like that was almost like a negative thing for me, because like as the slasher, dumb teenager kids are like making dumb teenager slasher mistakes, I'm like, no, like why would you do that? This person's gonna die because you did this, and this, like so dumb. Why would you? And I felt like I was fighting with the screen while I was watching a lot of this. And I don't know if that's intentional or not. I also don't know how to read this movie. Like, of course, I'm only looking at the first third of it. But my assumption here is that this whole series is going to be kind of about socioeconomic cycles. So this is a town where bad things keep happening. People keep committing these horrific crimes. And they do a lot of work on the front end of the movie to kind of establish the town as like the wrong side of the tracks. Like this is where all the people who are not well off live. And there's this other town, kind of like the Eagleton town of Parks and Recreation fame, if you know it, where like everybody is like really well off and living really like phony, happy lives. And there are no problems in that town. And so it seems like my understanding is like, this is a slasher franchise where we're kind of seeing violence carried out throughout centuries, decades. And a lot of that has to do with like the circumstances these people find themselves in, right? Like poverty kind of begets crime and violence and things like that. But there are also like parts of the movie where characters kind of stop everything to almost talk directly to the character and say like, talk directly to the camera, sorry, and be like, that's not how you're supposed to interpret this. Like there are characters who like directly critique the idea of like, this is just a town where people commit crime because they're poor. Instead, like it really pins all the blame for this violence on like this one supernatural figure who's like a person. And it feels like a very kind of individualistic, like neoliberal, if I can use that buzzword, way of looking at the world. Like, all of these cyclic systemic issues that people are facing are really just because of like this one person who did a bad magic spell once, But I want to avoid casting judgment because I've only seen the first third, and I'm really excited to see part 2 and part 3 because it's just such an interesting concept for a film project. And I would recommend it. I'm not going to say it's great. It's definitely not as good as Zola. It's definitely not as good as Honeymoon at this point in my experience with it. But it is interesting and worth watching and worth paying attention to over the next couple of weeks, I think.
It's on Netflix, correct?
It is on
Netflix. I'm going to watch it.
Well.
Oh, if I could say one more thing about it. Sorry, because you mentioned it was on Netflix. That the fact that it is on Netflix kind of poses a problem for the movie in a small way, which is that like I recently learned that Netflix with their original features, they have like this house style and like these specific cameras they make people shoot on. And this movie like looks kind of junky, like compared to the director's first feature Honeymoon, which is like gorgeous and like, again, really eerie and atmospheric. This looks and feels kind of like Stranger Things. And they're kind of going for that because it's a retro throwbacky thing, sort of like Stranger Things is. But I was never really impressed by the filmmaking of it. And there's also a weird thing at the end where it does a to be continued next time on Fear Street montage. And I'm like, is this a movie or isn't it? I mean, I know I've been on the record as saying there's not that much of a difference between movies and TV, but I like the idea of this being like 3 movies dropping at around the same time, as opposed to a short TV season with really long episodes.
I think they're just messing with Andrew on that.
They're messing with me.
They're like, this dude, I know this dude like has that whole debate, so let's mess with 3 movie Netflix series.
Jeez.
Well, cool. Jessica, we got a little bit more time, so why don't you take us home with the tried and true classic that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
It's 2, right? Number 2?
No. I mean, I saw both of them, but my favorite is the first one.
I saw both of them.
I did see both of them. Central Cinema was showing the Ooze one, and it was very good. They sold Harvey's Pizza during the movie,
Nice.
which was an amazing cinematic experience. Before I talk about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I was given a screener by Neon for the film Pig, which stars Nicolas Cage. And all I can say about it right now is that I really liked it. And I'm going to drop my review on cinematary.com on July the 12th.
On Monday, if you're listening to this.
Exactly. So you guys are going to get all the deets about Pig. It was a very, very good movie. I have lots of things to say about it. And it's surprisingly a foodie movie. So I was
you're
actually
the perfect person to review.
I know. I was like sort of the perfect person for that. So anyways, no more pigs. Now we're talking about turtles. So this movie came out in 1990. This is not the reboot new one. This is like the first movie that they made, directed by Steve Barron. And the things that I want to say about it is, like, I miss...
She said Steve Bannon for a second.
No, Jesus. Steve Bannon's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh my gosh.
Where they're fighting for the preservation of Western civilization, you know?
But Pete did it. Oh, sorry, Jessica.
Anyways, this was my first time watching this movie, and I was like really surprised by how touching it was. And there was something super special in the film that I realized while I was watching it, is that, like, now that we have like CGI and all of these like special effects, there is like not as much, sometimes there's not as much love put into films. Like, I think the last movie that I saw where I was like, oh, they're really doing this the original way was Possessor, because they made so many prosthetics like for the film, and there was like lots of original ideas of how can we visually convey what's happening but not just do it with a computer. And Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like, all of the suits were made, like there's lots of puppets that are in the film. Splinter the rat is a puppet, like he's like a giant puppet that they made. And there's also a flashback sequence of when the turtles were made, like when they were created, and it was like puppets, like little turtle puppets that were going into this ooze and like slowly turning into like weird human like turtles. But it was like all done with puppets. Like there was nothing that they did with like CGI or anything like that. And it was like a little bit corny, but in a really cool way. Like it was like you could tell that the team who put the movie together like really cared about what they're doing. And it was Jim Henson's like puppet company, cool. And they built like everything by hand, and it was like so much love and care was put into this like very sweet movie about fatherhood. Because like Splinter was talking about how these are his turtle sons, and like he gets captured in the movie, and he comes to them through the fire because they're like all trying to speak to him, and like the last thing that he says to them is like, "I love you, my sons," and it is just like such a tearjerker moment in the movie about like this rat who's just the dad of these turtles, but he loves it and he loves them. And I don't know, it was like weirdly touching. I did not expect for it to be like that sweet, but I don't know, it was crazy. And also I saw this movie at IMS because Central Cinema was doing an outdoor screening of it, and there were lots of kids at this showing of it, and they were quoting the movie like it was happening. And this is a movie that came out in 1990.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it was before my time. I didn't watch it as a kid.
Yeah, and they were like kids with like Ninja Turtle dolls, like quoting the film like verbatim around me.
Wow.
And it was very surprising. It was very funny. At the beginning of the movie, they say damn at least like 3 times because they're like, this is a kid's movie. Like, we're turtles, we're serious. And
it's like Beetlejuice has the F word in it, you know?
Yeah.
You can get away with a lot more.
And it was like one of the kids was like, "Oh, they're about to say a bad word," and he knew exactly when they were going to do it. And I was like, "This kid has seen this movie like 5 times at least."
This kid has seen things.
It was crazy, but it was a weird moment, but also very cool. Where you watch a movie for the first time and it's surprisingly amazing. Like I gave it like 4.5 stars on Letterboxd, and I was like, "Oh, this is so great!" It hit me in such a weird way where I was like, "This is awesome." And then I told a friend about it, and they watched it, and they were like, "This was not as good as you said that it was." So maybe I was partial to it for some reason.
You had the pizza. You were in the zone because you had that cinematic pizza. Yeah.
Yes, cowabunga indeed. So yeah, that's all I have. So. Cool. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it's probably playing somewhere. You could probably go to like a used DVD store and just find it like on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah. Heroes in
Is it streaming? Film. No, actually, it's at a used DVD store somewhere.
It probably is.
Go to your nearest flea market.
Yeah,
see what you can find.
Probably is. It probably is. It's worth it. You should buy it.
All right. Well, we're going to take a short break. If you're watching the video, you will have to switch over to the other video, which is on YouTube. They're separated because life can't be that easy. You have to work a little bit.
or we could just edit them together. No. We're not going to work a little bit. The listeners have to work a little bit.
No, work a little bit. Work a little bit. Like what? I mean, come on, please.
We made the thing. We did our work. Now you do a little work.
I sacrificed. I'm not going to get into that. All right, part 2 coming up next after this break.
Good.
Wow.
I sacrificed an hour on my Saturday for you.
You're like,
Like I was going to just switch out and like make this guy like my little picture for the rest of the episode. I like movies too. I'm a little
what
sir.
The fuck am I looking at?
I'm a little sir. I'm Cy Young. All
right.
Oh, sorry, Jessica. Let's turn off the broadcast.